The year is 1898. The 19th century is drawing toward its close, and the world believes itself to be entering a new and permanent age of mastery. Empires still stretch across the map in great colored blocks. London stands at the center of global finance and shipping. Steam has conquered distance. Steel has conquered doubt. The telegraph has made the far edges of the world feel a little nearer, and the ocean, once a wilderness of wind, sail, and prayer, is becoming a corridor of schedules, timetables, and machinery. Britain still dominates the great steamship lanes of the Atlantic, and the sea, though never gentle, is increasingly treated as something that can be measured, managed, and subdued. This is also a year of restless naval power. In 1898, the United States and Spain go to war. Fleets matter, armored hulls matter, guns, engines, discipline, signaling, logistics. These are not abstractions now, but instruments of national strength. Germany is beginning to think seriously in terms of great sea power as well. Across the civilized world, nations and companies alike are learning the same lesson. Whoever commands steel and steam commands the future. And yet for all this triumph, the sea remains what it has always been: vast, cold, patient, and utterly indifferent. Ocean-going commerce in this age is the bloodstream of the modern world. Passenger liners carry the wealthy in luxury, emigrants in hope, and businessmen in haste. Mail contracts, cargo interests, national prestige, and private fortunes all ride the same North Atlantic routes. Ships are no longer merely vessels, they are floating statements of civilization itself. The bigger the ship, the faster the crossing, the greater the glory of the company that owns her. To launch such a vessel is not simply to build a machine, it is to make a public claim that modern man has outgrown fear. And wherever great value moves, insurance follows. For centuries, marine insurance had stood behind the shipping world, turning risk into calculation and disaster into ledgers, claims, and ruin distributed across many hands. By the late 19th century, institutions such as Lloyd's had become deeply woven into the life of global shipping, supported by far-reaching intelligence networks that tracked departures, arrivals, losses, and rumors from port to port. A ship might vanish beyond the horizon, but its fate would still echo in counting rooms, underwriting desks, and exchange floors. A storm at sea could become a financial shock in London. A collision in darkness could travel inland by cable and arrive as panic, arithmetic, and blame. That matters here, because this is not only a story about a ship and the sea. It is also a story about confidence, commercial confidence, technological confidence, social confidence, and the terrible price that is paid when confidence hardens into pride. And now, in this world of polished brass, disciplined officers, hidden telegraph lines, and steel bulkheads, there appears a vessel so magnificent that she seems to belong not merely to a shipping company, but to the imagination of an age. Her name is Titan. She is the largest craft afloat, the wonder of her generation, a floating city of steel and electric certainty. Every science, every profession, every skilled trade known to civilized industry seems to have had a hand in her making. Her bridge is manned by officers schooled not merely as sailors, but as technicians and men of calculation. Her engine rooms represent power harnessed with almost military precision. Her passenger accommodations rival the finest hotels on land. Music, comfort, discipline, luxury, religion, medicine, engineering, all are gathered beneath one enormous shell and sent confidently out across the Atlantic. The Titan is not merely admired, she is believed in. Her builders have surrounded her with every modern safeguard they can name. She is divided into watertight compartments. Doors can be shut with speed and certainty. Her hull is steel throughout. Her designers, and the men who profit from her, regard her not as vulnerable, but as practically beyond defeat. She is spoken of as though nature herself must make way for her passage. She carries only the number of boats required by law, because law in such an age tends to trail behind confidence. When men begin to call a thing indestructible, they often do not mean that it cannot be destroyed. They mean only that they have grown tired of imagining the cost. And this is where the story acquires its eerie afterglow, because this is 1898, 14 years before the world will hear the name Titanic and attach to it all the grief and legend of modern shipwreck. But in her own age, before that later ship ever exists, the Titan possesses her own regal splendor. She is the queenly expression of a civilization intoxicated with size, speed, status, and mechanism. She does not borrow her majesty from the Titanic. Rather, from our later vantage, it is the Titanic that seems to echo her. So before the catastrophe, before the ice, before the scrambling boats, and the cold arithmetic of survival, let us linger a moment in the illusion. See the long black hull under electric light, hear the pulse of the engines below decks. Picture the polished dining saloons, the trimmed uniforms, the bands, the chaplains, the doctors, the stewards, the dignified passengers who step aboard believing themselves carried not merely by a ship, but by progress itself. Everything about the Titan declares that human intelligence has finally outmatched ancient hazard. But the sea does not sign contracts with human pride. And insurance, that patient bookkeeper of catastrophe, waits quietly in the wings. For now, though, none of that is visible on the shining surface. For now, there is only the Titan, immense and splendid, moving out into the North Atlantic like a verdict already rendered, and the age that built her cannot imagine what is coming. The year is 1898. The voyage begins in grandeur. With the help of 8 tugs, the Titan is drawn into the river and pointed toward the sea. And once the pilot is dropped off east of Sandy Hook, the true crossing begins. Deep below decks, stokers feed the furnaces like men condemned to labor inside a metal volcano. Oilers move through plunging machinery, listening for the one false sound that could mean disaster. Above them, passengers settle into music, conversation, reading, sea air promenades, and the cushioned calm of upper-class travel. Everything about the Titan suggests perfect order, a floating city of steel, routine, and confidence, built not merely to cross the Atlantic, but to conquer it. But beneath that polished order walks John Rowland, and for him, this voyage is already haunted. While the crew scrapes, sands, paints, and scrubs, Rowland catches sight of a woman among the passengers, Myra, the woman he once loved. 5 years have passed, yet one look from her still hits him like a wound reopening. He is no longer the man he had been then. He is a common sailor now, scarred, unsteady, disgraced, and soaked through with the appearance of failure. She sees him too, and recoils not with tenderness or pity, but with fear. She retreats inside to her husband, Colonel Selfridge, clutching her little daughter Myra, and speaks of Rowland as though he were some fallen, dangerous thing from her past. A man whose love turned bitter, whose unbelief offended her, whose collapse into drink seems to confirm every judgment she ever made about him. That is one of the cruel strengths of this story. Almost no one sees clearly. To the officers, he is a drunk. To the passengers, he is a rough sailor. To Myra, he is a ruined man from whom she once drew back in revulsion. But underneath the wreckage there remains intelligence, memory, shame, and a conscience that is not dead at all. In fact, in these chapters, John Rowland is almost the only person aboard the Titan who still possesses a moral sense strong enough to be inconvenient. And soon, it will become very inconvenient indeed. As night falls, the weather turns vicious. A hard wind blows out of the northeast. The sea strikes the bow. Spray lashes upward. Fog folds itself around the ship until the Titan seems to be charging into a wet gray wall. Still, she does not slow. Not for darkness, not for gale, not for common prudence. The officers keep their watch, the lookouts strain eyes and ears into the murk, the passengers sleep on in safety and ignorance. High above the deck is sent up into the crow's nest lookout, and the officers casually note that he is the man brought aboard drunk the previous day, the sort of man whose testimony can always be doubted later if necessary. Then comes the cry, something ahead. The first officer shouts for details. John Rowland sees it before the bridge truly does. A sailing vessel crossing the Titan's bow in the fog, dead ahead and too close. Orders are shouted, the wheel is thrown hard over, watertight compartments are closed, the captain is summoned, but there is no real time to save anyone. The Titan is moving too fast, too heavily, too arrogantly for last-second seamanship to matter. She strikes the smaller vessel not with a thunderous cinematic smash, but with something colder and more horrible, almost no effort at all. She cuts the ship clean through, wreckage rattles down, the two severed halves vanish into the darkness astern. And from one of them, above the shrieks and confusion, comes a sailor's curse hurled after the great liner, a curse against the brass-bound murderers who have done this thing and steamed on. And that is the real moral collision of this episode. Not merely steel against wood, or speed against chance, but power against responsibility. The Titan can destroy another ship so completely that she scarcely feels the blow. The damage to her own body is trivial. The damage to the human beings she has just encountered is total. And because the wealthy sleep undisturbed, because the compartments remain dry, because the engines never truly stop, the temptation immediately arises to do what institutions so often do when catastrophe is survivable for the powerful: deny, minimize, conceal, move on. The crew are gathered quietly. The captain questions them one by one. He wants not truth, but manageability. Carpenters report the ship is sound. Watchmen report there is no serious passenger alarm. The evidence of disaster exists mostly outside the Titan now, somewhere in the Black Atlantic, where the dead and drowning cannot climb aboard to testify. Then Rowland enters. And Rowland does testify. He tells the truth as he sees it, that nothing could be done at such speed and such fog, yes, but that the very fact of such speed is itself the crime. The captain offers him money, £100, in exchange for silence. It is not even disguised as principle. This is business, reputation, company protection, avoidable embarrassment, but Rowland refuses. He calls it wholesale murder and says he will speak at the first opportunity. When the captain tries intimidation, Rowland proves unexpectedly dangerous. He knows law. He knows seamanship. He reveals that he is not some ignorant hand before the mast, but a graduate of Annapolis, a fallen officer, yes, but still a man who understands the full enormity of what has happened. That refusal changes everything. In another kind of story, this might be the moment when integrity begins to restore a broken man. But futility is darker and more cynical than that. Here, conscience does not elevate, it simply paints a target on him. The captain studies him, searching for weakness, and finds it in whiskey. If John Rowland cannot be bought, then perhaps he can be discredited. Whiskey is placed in his coat. More whiskey is offered. Plans are laid to push him into delirium, to make him see snakes and ghosts and hallucinations, so that by the time the ship reaches port, he can be dismissed as a wrecked alcoholic with a diseased imagination. It is a chilling little conspiracy, not because it is melodramatic, but because it is so plausible. When truth becomes dangerous, power often prefers pathology. Better to say the witness is mad than admit the institution is guilty. Then, just when Roland's mind is already burdened by the collision, the story twists the knife personally. The next morning, in a pocket of sunlight on that immense ship, a little child runs laughing into his work area and clings to him. It is little Myra Selfridge's daughter. For a brief instant, Roland softens completely. He lifts the child, jokes with her, and for the first time we glimpse not the disgraced sailor or the reluctant witness, but the man he might once have been, warm, human, almost happy. Then the mother appears. She sees only horror. She snatches the child away, wild with alarm, and in that instant Roland understands something that hits him almost harder than the night's disaster. This child is hers, Myra is married, the old dream is truly dead. But Myra and her husband interpret the scene in the darkest possible way. They carry their fear straight to the captain, who is all too happy to use it. Suddenly, Roland is not merely a troublesome witness to a maritime crime. He is also an unstable ex-lover, a potential threat to a respectable woman and her child. It is exactly the sort of accusation that can bury a man before he ever reaches a courtroom. So by the end of these chapters, the news tightens from two directions at once. Publicly, the Titan glides on in majesty, carrying music, wealth, and confidence across the Atlantic as though nothing has happened. Privately, she now contains a secret killing in the fog, a captain engaged in bribery and manipulation, and one ruined sailor who has seen too much and refused to forget it. John Roland is watched, moved out of sight, and quietly prepared for discredit. The ship itself remains serene, society remains stratified, the machinery still runs, the passengers still promenade. But under that stately exterior, the moral structure is already cracking, and that is what makes these chapters so effective for video. Because nothing visible has yet happened to the Titan herself. She has not struck the iceberg. She has not begun to die. But spiritually, ethically, fate is already aboard. The ship has committed one crime and concealed it. It has chosen speed over life, prestige over truth, and expedience over justice. In stories like this, such choices do not remain isolated. They accumulate. They draw a consequence toward themselves. The sea has been warned, and so has John Roland. By the close of episode 2, he stands alone on a magnificent ship, hated by some, pitied by none, believed by no one who matters, carrying in his own bruised conscience the only honest account of what the Titan has done. And while the officers scheme to make him appear mad, the audience can already feel a greater madness moving beneath everything. The madness of calling a thing invincible, and then trusting human pride to prove it. The year is 1898 aboard the transatlantic luxury liner Titan, and the trap around John Roland is no longer subtle. The officers have already decided that if he cannot be bribed into silence, he can be broken into uselessness. He is ordered out of turn to a bridge lookout post on a cold, fog-choked night, and when the first officer casually probes him about his old naval training, Roland quickly senses that something is wrong. The men above him are waiting for him to fail, or ramble, or collapse into drunken nonsense, but instead he answers intelligently, showing that the mind they hope to discredit is still very much alive. Even before the disaster comes, the Titan is already morally rotten. A great steel palace hiding petty deceit, class contempt, and a deliberate attempt to destroy the one witness who refused to lie. Then the drug begins to work. What follows is one of the strangest and most haunting passages in the whole book. Standing high above the darkened decks, with fog all around, and the ship driving blindly forward at full speed, Roland slips into a terrible waking dream. The fittings of the ship become monsters, the fog becomes a void, and his grief over Myra swells into something cosmic and almost religious. A vision of failed love, of light and darkness racing toward him through infinite space, of memory and longing dissolving the practical world around him. It is not merely drunken confusion. It feels like judgment, as though the book itself pauses to drag Roland through an inward reckoning just before the outer catastrophe strikes. And then, in the middle of that nightmare, innocence appears. Little Myra, asleep and wandering, comes up onto the bridge deck and finds her way to the one man aboard who truly would protect her. It is an astonishing moment. The disgraced sailor, the supposed menace, the man her mother fears, is the one the child instinctively seeks in her sleep. Roland gathers her into his coat, half dazed, half awakening, and before any accusation or explanation can go further, the lookout cries out from above, "Ice dead ahead." The collision is catastrophic not just because the ship strikes ice, but because of how it strikes. The Titan does not ram a sheer wall and crumple neatly. Instead, she rides up onto a sloping mass of ice, lifts grotesquely out of the water, rolls, crashes onto her side, and tears herself open in the process. Boilers and engines wrench loose from their foundations and smash downward through the hull, while scalding steam fills the engineering spaces and kills the men below in agony. Water pours in, air screams out. The great, unsinkable vessel, which had been described with almost religious confidence at the start of the novella, becomes in moments a gigantic dying beast, groaning, tilting, and filling with trapped humanity that cannot climb what are now walls and ceilings. The Titan is not merely sinking, she is being unmade. And in one of the cruelest ironies of the story, Roland survives by accident. When the ship overturns and the boat deck is smashed against the berg, the broken end of the bridge is left on the ice amid shattered wreckage. And is there inside it, still clutching Myra? Drugged, cut, dazed, and hardly able to focus his eyes, he becomes the unwilling witness to the Titan's last moments. He can hear the roaring steam, the cries, the bursting compartments, and then the silence that tells him the end has come. Nearly everyone aboard is gone. The mighty vessel that treated smaller lives as expendable has itself become a mass grave in the North Atlantic. Yet for John Roland, the worst blow is still personal. He has heard Myra's mother's voice in the chaos, and now he has no idea whether she is dead beneath the sea or still somewhere alive in the dark. So the story narrows, suddenly and brilliantly, from thousands of lives to two. A broken man and a child on an iceberg. Roland tries to call to any boats that may still be near, shouting for them to save the little girl and watch for her mother. No answer comes. He makes a crude shelter from wreckage and canvas, wraps the child in his coat, and lies beside her for warmth through the freezing night. Meanwhile, unknown to him, boat number 24 has gotten away with Myra's mother alive aboard it. She is told that her baby is safe with John Roland in another boat, and because the officers either do not know better or do not care enough to know, mother and child are carried away from one another under a lie born of confusion, hierarchy, and catastrophe. It is a brutal separation, and it gives the whole survival sequence that follows a tragic ache. Each lives believing the other may already be lost. Morning on the iceberg does not bring rescue, it brings a new terror. When the fog clears, Roland sees nothing but blue sea, towering ice, and emptiness. Then he spots movement, a starving polar bear coming toward the wreckage. He has almost nothing left, no proper weapon, no strength to spare, no real hope of surviving a fight, but he runs anyway, because the child matters more to him now than his own life. The bear reaches her first and strikes her aside. Roland meets it with a jackknife. The animal crushes his arm in its jaws, batters him savagely, and yet somehow he manages to keep stabbing until the creature is killed. It is one of those scenes that feels outrageous when summarized, but in the logic of the story, it works because it is not heroic in the glamorous sense. It is desperate, ugly, painful, and half suicidal. Roland wins only by being willing, in that instant, to lose everything. From there, the episode becomes a grim little chamber drama of endurance. John Roland drags himself through pain and fever, salvages what he can from the wreckage, rigs a better shelter in a wrecked steel lifeboat, makes a small fire, and feeds the child with water and cooked bear meat. The whiskey he had nearly thrown away becomes temporary medicine. Then fever takes him. For 3 days he drifts in and out of delirium, tending the fire, dressing the child's wounds as best he can, and simply refusing to let the two of them die. It is here that Robertson does something unexpected. The novel stops being merely a tale of shipwreck and becomes almost a spiritual test. The disgraced atheist, all bitterness and intellect and wounded pride, is stripped down to love, pain, and responsibility. What follows on the ice may be the emotional heart of the whole book. Weak, alone, and surrounded by an immense indifferent world of moonlit ice and sky, wrestles openly with God. He argues against divine goodness, against providence, against religion itself, looking at the child's suffering as evidence that no merciful ruler governs the world. Yet when he reaches the edge of his strength, he does pray, not for himself, but for the little girl and for the safety of her mother. That is the key to the scene. John Roland does not suddenly become pious, he simply becomes unselfish. In helplessness, pride breaks, and what comes out of him is not doctrine but love. The moment is left beautifully unresolved, because almost at once a bark appears around the ice and sends a boat to rescue them. But even John Roland himself wonders whether this is an answer to prayer or merely an event that was already on its way. The novel leaves the question open, which makes it stronger. So, episode 3 ends with the Titan gone, the world transformed, and Roland changed more deeply than anyone aboard that proud ship could have imagined. The officers who tried to ruin him have lost their ship. The civilization that trusted steel, rank, and procedure has been shattered by ice and human arrogance. And the man everyone took for a wreck has become the sole guardian of innocence in the middle of a frozen waste. He is battered, feverish, and still uncertain of Myra's fate, but morally, he now stands taller than the entire vanished Titan ever did. In these chapters, the ship sinks, but the man begins painfully to rise. The story now does something wonderfully unexpected. After the ice, the screams, the overturned decks, and the lonely struggle for life on the berg, it turns away from the sea and goes straight into the machinery of civilization. We are brought into London, into the Royal Exchange, into Lloyd's, into that hard, bright world where shipwreck becomes chalked bulletins, legal clauses, ruined investors, and men trying to calculate exactly what a human catastrophe will cost. In Robertson's hands, this is not a cooling-off period after the wreck. It is another form of drama altogether, colder, more civilized, and in some ways, even more ruthless. Lloyd's is presented almost like a second ocean, crowded, noisy, technical, relentless, and global. Every captain's record is known there, every casualty is tracked, every rumor becomes actionable intelligence. Families come there in grief for news, while underwriters and brokers come there in dread of what the news will do to their fortunes. The sinking of the Titan does not merely break hearts, it sends financial shock through an entire system of men whose business is to turn danger into numbers. And among them, one of the loudest and most desperate is Mr. Meyer, the underwriter whose personal exposure to the Titan is so heavy that the loss threatens to ruin him. Robertson is very sharp here about how tragedy stratifies itself. While one old man returns again and again asking after his missing son and grandchild, Meyer drinks, rages, and calculates. Neither man is untouched by the wreck, but each suffers in a different currency. The old gentleman, Mr. Selfridge, is losing blood family, legacy, and the last emotional stake of his life. Meyer is losing money, status, solvency. The novel does not deny the reality of financial ruin, but it makes us feel the moral awkwardness of a world in which an underwriter may cry out, "This will ruin me," at the same disaster that has drowned hundreds. Then comes the hinge of the whole episode. John Rowland is on his way to London, alive, carrying the child. That fact electrifies the insurance struggle because Rowland is no longer merely a survivor, he is evidence. He is the one man who knows what happened on the Titan before the wreck, the collision with the Royal Age, the attempted bribery, the drugging, the use of a compromised lookout, and the full-speed recklessness that had always been disguised as confidence. Meyer knows that if Rowland's testimony can be shaped the right way, the insurance may be voided. Captain Bryce and the company attorney know that if Rowland speaks freely, the company may be morally and legally damned. So when they all gather in Meyer's office, the room becomes a kind of courtroom before any court has convened. The confrontation is one of the best scenes in the novella. Bryce and Austen arrive sleek, polished, and outwardly respectable, trying to preserve the fiction that the voyage had been uneventful until the iceberg. Meyer, oily but shrewd, begins pressing them with just enough legal knowledge to make them sweat, then springs the accusation. They concealed the collision with the Royal Age. Their answer is exactly what men in power so often reach for when cornered: attack the witness. Rowland is called an irresponsible drunkard. His mind is questioned, his condition is exaggerated. Yet this time he does not stand alone. Captain Barry, the man who rescued him from the berg and knows what sort of courage he possesses, is there beside him, and his blunt loyalty gives the whole scene a satisfying moral force. What makes these chapters so good is that the moral argument turns into a legal argument without losing any dramatic power. At first, the attorney coolly says that even if the Royal Age story is true, it does not by itself void the policy. But then Meyer tries another angle. If Rowland was drunk on lookout when the Titan struck the iceberg, perhaps the insurers can escape payment on grounds of bad faith or unlawful conduct. That is when the trap reverses. Rowland, thinking more clearly than any of them, asks whether Bryce and Austen were part owners. When it is admitted that they were, he lays out the real issue. If these part owners drugged a sailor, placed him on lookout, and continued under such reckless conditions, then their own unlawful acts as owner officers may have nullified the insurance. In one move, the broken sailor becomes the sharpest mind in the room. There is also a grim pleasure in watching the hierarchy collapse. Captain Bryce, who had once towered over Rowland with authority, can answer only with rage. Captain Barry floors him with a punch when he advances threateningly. Austen begins trimming his story to save himself, and Meyer realizes that his salvation may be near. By the end of Chapter 15, the officers who had tried to destroy Rowland are no longer in command of a liner. They are frightened men in an office, staring at exposure, disgrace, and possible criminal pursuit. Meyer all but tells them to flee England under assumed names before Lloyd's bulletins and Scotland Yard close in. The same civilized world that once gave them rank and prestige is now ready to spit them out. Then Robertson adds one more cruel turn. Mr. Selfridge, who has only half understood the technical struggle around him, asks the simple question that matters most to him: will the insurance be paid? Meyer, in triumph, tells him no, and explains that the loss will fall on him. The shock is fatal. Before a doctor can arrive, Selfridge dies there in the office. It is a hard scene because there is no villainous flourish to it. There is only a frail old man struck down by the sudden union of grief and ruin, and standing near him is Rowland, who has by now become protector not just of the child's body, but of her future. This is where Episode 4 reaches its real emotional summit. John Rowland learns that if he gives the testimony Mr. Meyer wants, the insurance will be defeated, the Titan investors will be ruined, and little Myra herself will inherit catastrophe instead of security. So he does the one thing nobody in that office expects. He refuses to testify. He lets the insurance stand. It is an extraordinary act, because it does not erase Captain Bryce's guilt or Mr. Meyer's opportunism, and it does not pretend the system is just. John Rowland simply chooses the child over vengeance. He decides that if the underwriters knowingly accepted the risk of a full-speed Atlantic racer in fog and ice, then they must bear the loss they priced into their business. In that sense, he is still serving justice, but now a broader and more merciful justice than the room around him can understand. Mr. Meyer's reaction is almost comic in its desperation, pleading, wailing, locking the door, trying to bully and coax John Rowland into saving him. But the scene ends not with legal triumph, but with human loyalty. Captain Barry stands by John Rowland completely. He helps him leave, helps secure his wages and passage, and understands at once why John Rowland made the choice. He would not break the child in order to punish the guilty. That may be the deepest thing about John Rowland in this whole middle stretch of the novel. He does not become saintly, he becomes responsible. He is no longer acting from wounded pride, or even chiefly from outrage, but from a future-oriented compassion that the polished men of law and insurance seem incapable of imagining. So episode 4 ends in a very different register from episode 3. There is no iceberg now, no polar bear, no frozen moonlight. Instead, there is London, paper, liability, stock, testimony, and the revelation that the world after disaster may be every bit as pitiless as the disaster itself. Yet out of that world, Rowland emerges morally stronger than ever, poorer, injured, still socially ruined perhaps, but now clearly the noblest figure in the story. And with passage secured, and little Myra still in his care, the tale is ready to cross one final threshold, back to America, back to the mother, and into the last emotional reckoning of all. By the start of this final episode, the storm and the iceberg are behind John Rowland, but the hardest part of his story is not yet over. He has survived the Titan, protected little Myra on the ice, refused to profit from legal revenge in London, and sworn off drink forever. Now he is sailing back west with the child in his care, carrying the one living proof that something good came out of the wreck. He thinks only of returning her to her mother. He imagines gratitude, surprise, perhaps even a kind of peace. But Robertson is too bitter and too observant to let the story end so easily. On the crossing home, Rowland realizes he never sent word ahead that the child is safe. Meanwhile, the insurance men in London decide at last to release his story to the press, hoping publicity will stir up corroborating testimony from other survivors. The account is embellished as it spreads, especially the part about the polar bear, and it is cabled across the Atlantic with the name of the ship carrying Rowland home. But the news arrives in New York too late to help him before he walks down the gangplank with little Myra on his shoulder. That delay matters, because what follows is one of the cruelest ironies in the whole novella. Rowland lands not as a celebrated rescuer, but as a ragged, one-armed seaman carrying a fashionable child through the streets of Manhattan. Before he goes to Mrs. Selfridge, he does one tender, practical thing first. He spends the last of his money at a department store to have the little girl bathed, dressed, and made presentable, because, as he sees it, she is a Fifth Avenue child and ought to be restored in dignity. It is a beautiful moment because it shows how complete his transformation has become. He does not think of himself at all. He is still in rags, he is still penniless, but the child must look right when she goes home. And then society does what society so often does. It sees appearances and leaps instantly to accusation. A policeman notices the contrast between the ragged man and the finely dressed child and stops him. Rowland answers with too much pride, too little tact, and almost at once suspicion hardens into force. At that exact moment, Myra's mother appears, sees Rowland with the child, screams, snatches the girl away, and collapses in hysterics, while her father denounces Rowland as a scoundrel and kidnapper. The child herself is crying for Rowland, but her voice does not matter. The crowd sides with wealth, respectability, and panic. The policeman clubs Rowland and drags him off through the street like a criminal. In one savage stroke, the man who saved the child from shipwreck, cold, hunger, and a polar bear is reduced in civilized New York to a public monster. That scene is the key to the ending because it strips away the romance of reunion and replaces it with something harsher and more modern. Reputation is social, not moral. The truth is real, but until institutions recognize it, the truth is helpless. Rowland has become a better man than almost anyone in the story, yet he is treated according to his clothing, his poverty, and old fears attached to his name. Mrs. Selfridge still sees the same dangerous unbeliever and rejected suitor she feared years before. Her father still sees insult to family honor. The police see only a likely culprit. The child alone responds honestly. Chapter 15 turns this humiliation into something almost satirical. John Rowland is brought into court bruised, disheveled, and treated as just another miserable offender. The prosecution repeats all the old poison, that he once courted Mrs. Selfridge, that he threatened revenge, that he followed her aboard ship in the guise of a sailor, and that he even attempted harm to the child. It is a grotesque rewriting of everything we have seen, but Robertson very cleverly stages the reversal not through eloquence from John Rowland, who barely defends himself, but through journalism. Reporters in the courtroom, recognizing the name from the morning papers, get the article in front of the magistrate. The court reads, notices the empty sleeve, connects the prisoner to the iceberg rescue, and in an instant, the case collapses. John Rowland is discharged on the spot. It is a deeply ironic acquittal. He is not saved by the people who know him, and not even by the mother whose child he preserved. He is saved by print culture, by chance timing, by a newspaper story dramatic enough to break through the laziness and prejudice of the courtroom. Even then, Mrs. Selfridge leaves more mystified than repentant, while little Myra cries out for as he slips away from the reporters and disappears back into the anonymous city. There is no immediate embrace, no public crowning of the hero, no restoration scene fit for melodrama. Robertson refuses all of that. Then comes the final chapter in the book, and with it one of the most quietly satisfying codas in the book. Starts over from nothing. He fishes under the docks. He trades fish for meals. He buys second-hand clothes. He gets work tallying cargo, then addressing envelopes, then sits for a civil service examination. Slowly, stubbornly, and without spectacle, he rebuilds himself. This is one of the strongest parts of the ending, because it makes redemption practical. He is not magically restored to naval rank or suddenly welcomed back into elite society. He simply works. He becomes sober, respectable, employable, and once again visibly a gentleman. 2 years later, he is appointed to a good government position and tells himself that his future is finally his own and that his old suffering came from overvaluing women and whiskey. But even that is not the end, because the book's final note is smaller and softer than all the calamity that came before. After 6 more months, Roland receives a letter from Mrs. Selfridge. She says she has watched from a distance while he fought his way back to his old standards. She congratulates him. And then she admits the true reason for writing. Little Myra will not forget him. The child keeps asking for him and crying. Mrs. Selfridge can bear it no longer and asks whether he will come and see Myra. Robertson closes with a perfect last stroke. And the man went to see Myra. The ambiguity is deliberate, of course. He goes to see the child, but the line also lets the older Myra echo behind the younger one, so that love, gratitude, memory, and second chances all hang in the air without being explained away. And that makes the ending much better than a simple happy ending. The Titan is gone. Hundreds are dead. Institutions proved corrupt, callous, or absurd. The mother never fully understands what Roland truly was. The world does not neatly reward virtue. And yet something real has still happened. A broken man has chosen truth, sacrifice, sobriety, courage, and responsibility, again and again, until he has become worthy of the light he nearly lost. In a story obsessed with steel, speed, wealth, and prestige, Robertson finally locates greatness somewhere else entirely, in character, under pressure. The Titan was called unsinkable and went down. Roland was called ruined and rose.